Hello everyone! I'm sure you've all seen it by now, but there has been a lot of Hobbit festivities happening recently, and I am very excited for it. Unfortunately, I myself will not be able to attend the Brandywine Festival, but that doesn't mean I can't make a Hobbity outfit anyways. I have plans to make a Hobbit skirt eventually, but for now, we're going to start with the vest. To start, we're going to drape on the dress form to get our initial pattern pieces. Now, this dress form does not fit me exactly, so there is going to be some fiddling we'll have to do after, but this is a good place to start. The inspiration I took for this pattern is a mixture of a plain Hobbit vest that you see a lot of the male Hobbits wearing, and a vest or waistcoat from the Victorian era. After we have the pattern on the dress form, I take them down, unpin everything, and trace the pattern onto paper. I then use this paper pattern to cut out more pieces, just to see how they look on the other side and make sure everything's even. And once I have the full mock-up, I can then try it on and make adjustments. I am actually going to take a minute to talk about this channel and what I'm doing. I am having an extremely hard time posting consistently. It just seems to take so long, and part of that is also because I like to make patterns out of the things that I'm making, so that way if you want to make it too, you can, and it'll be available for that, but that does take more time. So my plans for now are to just, I hope for almost every video where I'm making the pattern myself, not using a commercial pattern, I will be digitizing it and making that pattern available on my website. I have a few patterns up already if you want to check them out. This harvesting apron's actually very Hobbity too. I didn't think about it when I was making it, but it very much suits the theme, so I'm going to throw that one in here too. So for now, I'm not planning on having a set schedule. I'm just going to do things as quickly as I can while still maintaining the quality of the things that I'm making. I don't want to cut corners just to get videos out quicker, and unfortunately that means it's going to take longer for me to get content out. That being said though, I am making this vest into a pattern, so if you want to make your own Belladonna vest, that will be available on my website as soon as this video drops. So you can find the link to this vest and my other patterns in the description below. With the second try on, I noticed this vest is extremely tight. It fits me perfectly, but I realized if I put on a chemise or my 18th century men's shirt underneath this, it might be a little too tight. I was also contemplating taking it in a little bit, which I tried, and then I did not end up liking the way that looked, so I went back to this version of the vest. It just made it look a little too modern with how open that arm's eye was. And that is originally where I had left it for the day, and as I was thinking about it that night, I realized I actually want to add a lacing panel. Now, if you have seen my medieval bathing dress video, you will know that I have not had the best luck with this in the past, but this time, instead of doing eyelets, I've decided to go with a loop solution for these side panels. I think it's not going to be a problem, especially because this is not how we get in and out of the garment by lacing ourselves into it. It's going to be the buttons. So this is just going to be adjusting depending on how thick the garment I'm wearing underneath is. In order for this to lace down properly though, I need to take some of that extra length out of the two pieces right next to it, and I'm going to do that as we go along instead of just refixing the pattern again. Here's what we're working with for materials. I have these two plaids that were scrap material from other projects, so we're working with very limited material. Putting it up against the material I'm going to use for the skirt, I think I like this one more. Originally, I was thinking about lining this with some of the silk material I had laying around for an easier glide against the material underneath, but because I'm already going to have so many layers, and this is a synthetic and as such is not very breathable, I ended up just lining this vest with another cotton. And this green material is what I'm thinking of using for the side panels. Of course, I could use the regular plaid for the sides, but I think I like this accent green color more. Of course, this feels like the more Hobbity choice in the long run. I did not include seam allowance in these original pattern pieces, so I'm going to trace the pattern pieces and then add seam allowance onto that, so that way I have both lines. For the lacings, the loops, and this strap material in the back, I actually got out another pattern that I had finished a little while ago, my harvesting apron pattern. I have pattern pieces in here that'll be the correct size for what I want, so I'm going to use that as my pattern pieces for those. And then I repeat the same steps on the lining pieces. The first thing I did after all my pieces were cut out was iron and stitch my loops and ties. For the loops and the ties, I ended up doing the bias tape method where you fold it in half, iron, fold the ends into the middle, and iron again, and then fold the whole thing together and iron one more time. But this ended up being pretty bulky because of the canvas material I was using, and I actually ended up liking the strap for the back piece more by just folding in half and stitching and flipping inside out. I think I should have done that for all of the pieces. But the loops and ties work just fine even though they're a little thick, so if I ever do this again, I'll probably do that method, but for now, we're gonna move on and not go back and fix it. After that, I wanted to add basting stitches so nothing would stretch while I was stitching it together. Originally, these seams would just be the armhole, the shoulder seam, and the front piece, that angled piece, but because I was having such a hard time seeing my lines, I ended up running a basting stitch along the whole garment on all of the pieces. It's an extra step that takes a long time, but it's totally worth it in the end, just to make sure that everything is nice and neat when we move on. After that, I stitched the darts, then I ironed and unpicked the basting stitches along those dart seams so that way there was no pink showing through on the front. Finally, we are ready to move on to stitching everything together. First I did the lining, then I did the main fabric. Before putting together the main fabric, we have to prepare our loops and our ties and the material that goes on the back panel piece. For the loops, I take the long strip of fabric that I had stitched together all in one go to make it easy and snip them to the correct length. Then I marked the side panel pieces where the loops should go and stitched them into place so that way they wouldn't move when I attached this piece to the rest of the garment. This is also a nice reinforcement on those loops so that way when they take tension, they're not going to rip out. And I did the same thing with the back tie, even though I didn't have to snip this to length. I marked on the back panel piece where I wanted that tie to go, and then stitched it down so that way I didn't have to worry about putting it in when I was folding those pieces together and stitching them. I also didn't have any kind of buckle or anything to make this adjustable, so I just used a strip of fabric in place of that. snipped all of the rounded seams and ironed them flat so that way there was no buckling or puckering happening once these are stitched together. I also don't want the seams to lift up in between once the lining and the main material are up against each other. So to really make sure that those seams stay flat and don't move anywhere once it's all put together, I did one more stitch right next to the seam on both sides. This is really just tacking everything down and keeping it in place. To attach the lining to the main fabric, we put right sides together and stitch along the whole border except for the shoulder seams. Both the front and the back shoulder seams we leave open, so that way we can tuck the fabric into each other once everything's flipped the right side out. I also left a little bit of a hole on the bottom edge of the vest. That's where we're going to flip everything inside out. I also had to do some fun folding here because the lining I did not change like I did the front of the vest, so the lining's a little bit bigger than the outside of the vest. Normally we would do the welt pockets first on the main material before adding the lining on, so that way those pockets are on the inside. But because of how this vest is turning out, since I'm playing with it for the first time, and I'm not sure where I want those welt pockets to sit once the vest is all the way put together, I'm going to end up doing that last and just hand tacking the pockets down against the lining since they're not going to be inside like they're supposed to be. Before flipping everything inside out again, I clipped all of the curved seams so that way it'll lay flat once it's flipped the right way. With it flipped properly, I like to adjust the seam and pin everything down so that way when I hit it with the iron, nothing moves or shifts funny. But that's just the way I like to do it. If you just want to hit it with the iron, you can do that too. Once it's ironed, we can do another overstitch and make sure that everything stays properly and that the lining doesn't poke through when we're wearing it. I like to tuck the lining in just a little bit, just enough that it doesn't show. With that finished, I put it back on the dress form, tie the ties just so it fits properly on the dress form, and then I will start playing with where the welt pockets go. I used strips of paper and pins just to kind of get an idea on how I wanted this to lay. The only important part that I wanted to keep in mind here is whichever side I ended up wanting the top welt pocket on the breast, I wanted the buttons to be on top, facing closer to that welt pocket, if that makes sense. For any pocket watches or anything like that, I wanted that curved edge to be closer to the breast welt pocket. I don't have any matching buttons, so I just went through and found the closest similar wooden buttons that I had. Very Hobbity choice, in my opinion, having mixed matched wood buttons. I drafted the size of the welt pocket on paper first and then tested it out, which is a good thing because I ended up making it just a little too small that first time. So I ended up having to go back in and make them a little bit bigger, and then we were ready to move on using the real fabric. I used the outer fabric, the exact same fabric, for the welt pockets so that way they blend in and they don't stand out too much. I didn't spend too much time pattern matching just because I was already limited on material and there wasn't much I could do to get the patterns to match. But because of how small these lines are, it blends in well enough the way it is, so I'm not too worried about it. I'll leave a video in the description of the best example I could find of someone teaching how to do a welt pocket. This is the video I used on how to learn, but I'll kind of show you what I did here. I traced the pattern on the wrong side of the material so that way when it's flipped inside out, that the right side is what's showing on the front of the garment. Then I pinned the little square on the scrap material onto the main material where I wanted the welt pocket to go, and then I stitched the box. and I followed the line on the inside, cutting down the middle and that little triangle on the end. Then I could flip the material to the inside, and that'll create this open square. I ironed the inner material down before folding up that bottom edge and ironing that in the way of the pocket. This is what creates that bottom welted edge of the pocket. Then I stitched that extra triangle that we cut to the edge of the inside pocket, not to the main garment. This is to make sure that that piece doesn't wiggle around anywhere once the pocket's finished. Then we can flip the bottom edge up and stitch along the outside of that box to create the actual pocket part. And then I stitched it with a zigzag stitch to finish that raw edge. I didn't want it to fray since it's not inside the lining in the main material. And I repeated the same steps for all of the pockets. With that done, it's time to move on to the buttons. I pinned where I wanted the garment to end, just so I kind of had a guide on where I could put these buttons, and then I did a little bit of math to figure out how to keep them even, since these buttons aren't exactly the same. Some of them are smaller and some of them are bigger, so it took a little bit of moving and adjusting to get everything to look properly placed. Then I held the button down and I used an erasable pen to mark where I wanted those buttons to be, since the front part of the vest is where the buttonhole stitch needs to go. I also traced around each individual button instead of moving one around, since, as I mentioned before, these are different sizes, and that size is going to determine how big that button will be. I used the buttonhole stitch on my machine to play with it and test it for a little bit on some scrap fabric, and I didn't have any issues here on the scrap fabric, but once I moved on to the actual garment, I only got 2 buttons in before it just completely gave out on me and it stopped working. So at this point, I kind of just stopped filming, and I ended up spending 2 days using a zigzag stitch and fiddling with my machine to do this manually instead of with the button stitch. I originally learned to do buttonholes by hand instead of with the machine, and then the last thing that I made was this 1960s dress. I didn't have any issues with the buttonhole stitch for 3 buttons on the back of the dress, and they turned out wonderful. So this gave me one good garment, and then it just completely stopped working. So I think I am officially gonna go back to hand stitching buttonholes from now on. It is just not worth the hassle for this machine or this garment. I don't know what was wrong with it. It took forever, and I stopped filming. But once all of that was done, I could move on to opening those buttonhole stitches. I laid the material out again like I did when I was first marking the buttons, and I marked where the button should go on the other piece of material. And then the only thing left to do was stitching the buttons on by hand. I love how this vest turned out. It came out way better than I was expecting, well worth the effort, even though it ended up taking me 2 weeks longer than I was expecting because of extenuating circumstances and just issues with my machine. I was just having a time with it, but it was totally worth it in the end. I love how this turned out. It also would work pretty well for a Pride and Prejudice-esque vest as well, so I have no complaints. And I absolutely will be making more of them. Stay tuned for the Hobbit skirt I'll be making soon and other projects to come. See y'all in the next one. Bye!